My brother-in-law demanded a DNA test while my husband lay in a coma. He wanted to prove my son wasn't his nephew so he could inherit everything. The results confirmed more than just paternity. My husband Joel was driving home from work on a Tuesday evening when a truck ran a red light and hit him on the driver's side. He was in surgery for 9 hours. The doctors said he had severe brain trauma and they could not predict when or if he would wake up. They told me to prepare for the possibility that he might never come back. I sat by his bed every single day for 3 weeks. I held his hand and talked to him about our son Maddie, who was 8 years old. I told him about Maddie's soccer games and his spelling tests, and how he asked about his dad every night before bed. I played Joel's favorite music on my phone. I read him the sports section from the newspaper because he always complained that I never cared about basketball. I did everything I could think of to bring him back. Joel's brother Frank showed up at the hospital on day 4. He stood in the doorway of the room and looked at Joel hooked up to all those machines. He did not cry. He did not even look sad. He asked me about Joel's life insurance policy. I told him I did not want to talk about that while my husband was still fighting for his life. Frank said I was being naive and that someone needed to think about practical matters. He said Joel had a lot of assets, and we needed to figure out who would manage them if he never woke up. I asked him to leave. He left, but he came back 3 days later with papers. He said he talked to a lawyer about Joel's estate. He said that as Joel's only sibling, he had questions about the line of inheritance. He said specifically that he had concerns about Maddie. I asked what concerns he could possibly have about an 8-year-old boy. That is when Frank said he did not believe Maddie was Joel's biological son. He said Maddie did not look anything like Joel. He said Maddie had darker hair and different eyes. He said he always thought it was suspicious that I got pregnant so quickly after Joel and I started dating. He said I probably trapped Joel with another man's baby, and now I was trying to steal the family money. I could not speak for a long time. I just stared at him standing there in the hospital room next to his unconscious brother, accusing me of something so horrible. I asked him if he seriously came here to call me a liar and a cheat while Joel was in a coma. He said he was protecting his brother's legacy. He said Joel worked hard for everything he had, and Frank was not going to let some woman and her bastard child take it all. He actually used that word. Bastard. About my son. About his nephew. He demanded a DNA test. He said if I refused, it would prove I had something to hide. He said he would get a court order if he had to. He said once he proved Maddie was not Joel's son, he would petition to have himself named as Joel's next of kin and take control of all the assets. I told him to get out. I told him if he ever came near me or my son again, I would call security. He smiled and said he would see me in court. Frank filed his petition 2 weeks later. His lawyer argued that there was reasonable doubt about Maddie's paternity and that a DNA test was necessary to determine rightful inheritance. My lawyer said it was ridiculous, but the judge agreed to hear the case because Frank presented it as a matter of protecting Joel's estate from potential misrepresentation. I was furious. I was exhausted. I was spending every day at the hospital and every night worrying about my husband, and now I had to deal with this greedy vulture trying to steal my son's future. But I agreed to the DNA test. I agreed because I had nothing to hide. I agreed because I wanted to see the look on Frank's face when he realized how wrong he was. I agreed because I wanted this to be over so I could focus on my husband. The test was done at a certified lab. They swabbed Maddie's cheek and took a sample from Joel at the hospital. Frank insisted on being present for everything. He watched the whole process with this smug look like he had already won. The results came back in 2 weeks. We met at the lawyer's office to review them together. Frank sat across the table from me with his arms crossed, looking confident. His lawyer opened the envelope and read the results out loud. The DNA test confirmed with 97% certainty that Joel was Maddie's biological father. Frank's face went pale. He grabbed the paper and read it himself 3 times. He said there must be a mistake. He said the lab must have mixed up the samples. His lawyer told him the results were definitive and there was no grounds for appeal. I could have stopped there. I could have taken my victory and walked away. But my lawyer had done some additional research while preparing for the case. He discovered that Frank had been named in Joel's original will from before we got married. Joel left his brother 40% of his estate back then, but Joel updated his will after Maddie was born. The new will left everything to me and Maddie. Frank got nothing. Frank did not know about the updated will. He thought he was still getting 40% even if Maddie was proven to be Joel's son. He thought he would at least walk away with something. My lawyer handed him a copy of the current will. Frank read it and his hands started shaking. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loud against the floor and he grabbed his briefcase without saying anything. I watched him walk to the door and stop with his hand on the handle. He turned back and opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but then just shook his head and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. Gregory collected all the papers from the table and put them back in the folder. He looked at me with this calm expression that made me feel like maybe things would actually be okay. He told me Frank had no way to fight this now. The DNA results were clear, and the will was legal, and there was nothing Frank could do about any of it. He said I should go back to focusing on my husband and my son, and let him handle anything else Frank tried to pull. I thanked him and walked out to my car feeling like I should be happy, but mostly just feeling tired. The drive back to the hospital took 20 minutes, and I spent the whole time thinking about Frank's face when he read that will. Part of me felt bad for him even though he deserved every bit of what happened. He looked so shocked and small sitting there realizing he had nothing. But then I remembered him calling Maddie a bastard, and that feeling went away fast. I parked in the hospital garage and took the elevator up to Joel's floor. The hallway smelled like cleaning products and that weird hospital smell that gets in your nose and stays there. I pushed open the door to Joel's room and saw him lying there exactly like I left him that morning. The machines were still beeping. The ventilator was still breathing for him. Nothing had changed. I sat down in the chair next to his bed and took his hand. His skin felt warm, but his hand just lay there in mine without moving. I told him about what happened at the lawyer's office. I told him Frank knew the truth now and that he couldn't take anything from us. I told him our family was safe and he didn't need to worry about anything except getting better. I sat there holding his hand and watching his chest move up and down with the machine, and the victory from earlier felt like it didn't matter at all because Joel was still gone. I got home around 8 that night and found Maddie sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. My mom had stayed with him during the day like she did most days now. She gave me a hug and asked how things went, and I just said it was handled. She left after that, and it was just me and Maddie. He finished his math problems and put his pencil down and looked at me with those serious eyes that looked so much like Joel's. He asked why Uncle Frank hadn't come to visit Dad at the hospital. I felt my stomach tighten because I knew this question was coming, but I still didn't know how to answer it. I sat down next to him and tried to figure out what to say. I told him Uncle Frank made some bad choices lately. I said he said some mean things and acted in ways that weren't okay. I told him Uncle Frank wouldn't be coming around for a while because of those choices. Maddie nodded slow like he was trying to understand something bigger than what I was saying. He asked if Uncle Frank was mad at us. I said no. Uncle Frank was dealing with his own problems, and sometimes adults make mistakes when they're scared or upset. Maddie looked down at his homework, and I could see him thinking hard about something. He said okay in this quiet voice, and I realized he had been worried about more than just his dad. He had been carrying all this other stuff too and trying to figure it out on his own. I pulled him close and hugged him and told him everything was going to be okay, even though I wasn't completely sure that was true. 3 days later, I was sitting in Joel's room reading the newspaper out loud, when Dr. Cook came in looking different from usual. She had this expression that was almost excited but trying to stay professional. She checked Joel's chart and then looked at me and said his brain swelling had gone down a lot. She said the scans from that morning showed real improvement. She said they wanted to try reducing his sedation to see if he would respond. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I asked what that meant, and she said it meant there was a chance he might wake up. She said they couldn't promise anything, but the signs were good, and they were cautiously optimistic. I felt dizzy and had to sit down even though I was already sitting. Dr. Cook kept talking about the process and what to expect, but I could barely hear her over the sound of blood rushing in my ears. After she left, I grabbed my phone and called Mariana. She answered on the second ring, and I told her what the doctor said. She said she would be there in 30 minutes. I needed someone with me for this. I needed someone to sit with me through the scary hope that Joel might actually come back. A week passed and nothing happened. They reduced the sedation, but Joel stayed asleep. Dr. Cook said that was normal and we needed to be patient, but every day felt like forever. Then one night at 11, my phone rang. I saw Frank's name on the screen and almost didn't answer. I stared at it ringing in my hand, trying to decide if I wanted to hear whatever he had to say. Finally, I answered. His voice sounded rough and smaller than I remembered. He said he knew I wouldn't forgive him. Then he started talking about how he always felt like Joel's lesser brother. He said Joel was smarter and more successful and everyone liked him better. He said when he found out about the accident, he panicked. He said he thought about being left with nothing while Joel's family got everything, and he just lost it. He said he knew what he did was wrong, but he was scared and desperate and he wasn't thinking straight. I cut him off before he could say anything else. I told him I didn't care about his insecurity or his fear. I said his problems didn't give him the right to call my son a bastard. I said trying to steal Maddie's inheritance while Joel was fighting for his life was unforgivable. I said I didn't want to hear his excuses. Frank went quiet on the other end. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked if Joel was getting better. His voice sounded different when he asked, like he actually cared about the answer. I realized he didn't know anything about Joel's condition. Nobody had been updating him since word got around about what he tried to do. The whole family had cut him off. I told him the doctors were hopeful, but we were still waiting. I told him Joel's brain swelling had gone down, and they were trying to bring him out of the coma. Frank made this sound like he was crying, or trying not to cry. He said he was sorry. He said it again and again, like saying it enough times would make it true. I told him sorry didn't fix anything and hung up. 2 weeks later, the hospital social worker asked to meet with me. Her name was Olivia, and she had kind eyes, but her job was to talk about money. We sat in a small office down the hall from Joel's room, and she showed me papers with numbers on them. She said even with Joel's insurance, the costs were adding up fast. She said the ICU care and all the treatments and the rehabilitation he would need later would cost between $30,000 and $40,000 out of pocket. I looked at the numbers and felt sick. It was so much money. Olivia saw my face and put her hand on mine. She said Joel's estate could cover these costs. She said that was exactly what estates were for. Then I remembered that was exactly what Frank had tried to stop me from accessing. If Frank had won his case, I wouldn't have been able to use Joel's money for his own medical care. I would have been drowning in debt while Frank took everything. Olivia kept talking about payment plans and financial assistance, but I was thinking about how close we came to losing everything. 2 weeks after they reduced the sedation, I walked into Joel's room for my morning visit like I did every day. Dr. Cook was already there checking his monitors. I sat down in my usual chair and watched her work. Then Joel's eyes moved. I thought I imagined it at first, but then they moved again. They opened just a little bit and moved toward the light Dr. Cook was holding. She noticed right away and started doing tests. She shined the light in his eyes and they tracked it. She asked him to squeeze her hand and his fingers moved. It was weak, but it was movement. I started crying immediately. I couldn't help it. Tears just poured down my face while Dr. Cook kept testing him and talking to him. She asked him to squeeze my hand, and I felt his fingers press against mine. It was the smallest pressure, but it was there. It was real. He was coming back. I brought Maddie to the hospital the next day to see his dad awake for the first time. We walked down the hallway together, and I told him Dad was awake but still very weak. I told him Dad might not be able to talk yet and he might look different, but he was getting better. Maddie nodded, but when we got to the doorway, he stopped. He just stood there looking at Joel in the bed with his eyes open. Then Maddie started crying. He backed away from the door and wouldn't go in. I tried to get him to come closer, but he shook his head and kept crying. We went home and he wouldn't talk about it. That night, he finally broke down. He climbed into my lap, even though he was getting too big for that, and sobbed into my shirt. He told me about nightmares where his dad died. He said he had them almost every night. He said he was scared to be happy about Dad waking up because what if something bad happened again? He said losing hope the first time hurt so much, and he didn't want to hurt like that again. I held him and let him cry and told him it was okay to be scared. I told him hoping was scary, but we had to do it anyway. The next week, Mariana called me and said she organized something. She said she talked to the other parents from Maddie's school and they wanted to help. She set up a meal train so people could bring us dinner. I told her she didn't need to do that, but she said it was already done. That same week, Joel's mother Lily called and said she was driving up to stay with us. She lived 8 hours away, but she said family needed to be together right now. I tried to tell her we were managing, but she wouldn't hear it. She showed up 2 days later with suitcases and groceries. She took one look at me and said I looked terrible. She said I had lost too much weight and I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. She said accepting help wasn't weakness. She said I had been holding everything together by myself for too long and now it was time to let other people carry some of the weight. I wanted to argue, but I was too tired. I let her take over the cooking and the cleaning and managing the house. I let Mariana and the other parents bring us food. I let myself accept that I couldn't do everything alone anymore. Joel's recovery continued slowly over the next 3 weeks. He could sit up without help now. He could feed himself with his right hand, though his left still trembled when he tried to use it. The speech therapist worked with him every afternoon on forming words more clearly. Some days were better than others. Some days he got frustrated when his mouth wouldn't cooperate with what his brain wanted to say. I stayed with him through all of it. Maddie came to visit twice a week now instead of hiding at home. He still wouldn't get too close to the bed, but at least he came into the room. He would stand near the door and tell Joel about school or soccer practice. Joel would smile and nod even when talking exhausted him. It was 3 weeks after Joel first opened his eyes when I walked into the hospital waiting area and saw Frank sitting in one of the plastic chairs near the entrance. I stopped walking. My whole body went rigid. Frank looked up and saw me. He stood slowly. He looked terrible. His face was thinner than I remembered. His clothes hung loose on his frame like he had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older somehow. More tired. I walked toward him ready to call security if he said one wrong thing. He held up both hands like he was surrendering. He told me he had been in therapy. He said he needed to understand why he did what he did. He said his therapist helped him see how jealousy poisoned him into sabotaging his relationship with his only brother. He said he wanted to apologize to Joel directly. I stared at him trying to figure out if this was real or another manipulation. I asked him why I should believe anything he said after what he did. He said he didn't expect me to believe him. He said he just wanted a chance to tell Joel he was sorry. I thought about it for a long time, standing there in the waiting area with people walking past us. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. Part of me wondered if Joel needed to hear this. I told Frank he could see Joel for 15 minutes with me present the entire time. I said if Joel wanted him to leave, then he would leave immediately without any argument. Frank nodded and agreed. We walked down the hallway together in silence. I opened the door to Joel's room and stepped inside first. Joel was sitting up in bed watching television with the sound turned low. He looked over when he heard the door. His eyes landed on me first, then moved past me to Frank standing in the doorway. Joel's eyes widened. Recognition flashed across his face. Then his expression changed into something hard. Something cold. I had never seen Joel look at his brother like that before. Frank stepped into the room slowly. He moved like he was approaching something dangerous. He stopped a few feet from the bed. His hands were shaking. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He tried again, and words came out halting and broken. He said he was sorry. He said he let jealousy turn him into someone unrecognizable. He said when Joel was lying there unconscious, Frank panicked about being left with nothing. He said he knew that wasn't an excuse. He said what he did was unforgivable. He said he accused me of horrible things because he was scared and angry, and convinced himself Joel always got everything while Frank got nothing. His voice cracked when he said he called Maddie a bastard. He said he would regret those words for the rest of his life. Joel listened without interrupting. His face stayed hard the whole time Frank talked. When Frank finally stopped, Joel was quiet for almost a minute. Then he spoke in a weak voice that still carried weight. He asked why Frank thought he deserved Joel's money more than Joel's own son. Frank's face crumpled. Tears started running down his cheeks. He said he didn't have a good answer. He said he was wrong about everything. Joel watched his brother cry, and his expression softened slightly, but the hurt was still there in his eyes. Joel told Frank he needed time to decide if their relationship could be salvaged. He said either way, Frank would never be involved in decisions about Maddie or the family estate. He said those boundaries were permanent. Frank wiped his face with his sleeve and nodded. He said he understood. He said he would respect whatever Joel decided. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the bedside table. He said it had his contact information. He said Joel could reach out if and when he was ready. Then Frank looked at me. He said he was sorry to me too. He said he knew sorry wasn't enough, but he meant it. Then he left. I sat down in the chair next to Joel's bed. Joel stared at the closed door for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked if I thought Frank meant it. I said I didn't know. I said people could change, but it took more than words. Joel nodded slowly and closed his eyes. The physical therapist started working with Joel the next week once the doctors agreed he could sit up reliably without support. I watched through the window as the therapist helped Joel stand for the first time. He gripped the walker so hard his knuckles turned white. His legs shook. He took one step forward and almost fell. The therapist caught him and helped him back to sitting. They tried again. This time Joel made it 3 steps before his legs gave out. By the end of the session, he walked 10 feet with the walker. Proud and heartbroken at the same time. 10 feet. That was all he could manage. The therapist came out after and explained that recovery would take months of intensive work. She said Joel would likely have some permanent mobility limitations. She said he would need ongoing support with balance and coordination. She said we should prepare for a long road ahead. I thanked her and went back into the room. Joel was lying in bed looking exhausted. He asked how it looked from outside. I told him it looked like progress. He smiled a little, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. Maddie started weekly sessions with Clara the following week. Clara was a child therapist who specialized in family medical trauma. The first 2 appointments, Maddie came home and wouldn't talk about what they discussed. He just went to his room and closed the door. After the 3rd appointment, something changed. We were eating dinner together at the kitchen table when Maddie put down his fork and started talking. He said he was scared of being happy about Dad improving because something bad might happen again. He said Clara was teaching him that protecting yourself from disappointment also blocks out joy. He said he was trying to let himself feel happy even though it was scary. I reached across the table and took his hand. I told him I was proud of him for talking about it. He squeezed my hand back and kept eating. It was a small moment, but it felt huge. Joel's cognitive function improved enough by the 5th week that we could have real conversations again. I sat with him one evening after Maddie went to bed and we talked about Frank's betrayal. I watched Joel process the hurt of what his brother did while he was physically vulnerable and unable to defend himself or his family. Tears ran down Joel's face. He said he always knew Frank resented him, but he never imagined that resentment could turn so vicious. He said he needed to grieve the brother relationship he thought they had. He said the Frank who came to apologize seemed different from the Frank who demanded the DNA test, but Joel didn't know if that change was real or temporary. I held his hand and let him talk through it. I didn't try to tell him what to feel or what to do. I just listened. Duncan called Joel's hospital room phone a few days later. I answered, and Duncan asked to speak to his son. I held the phone to Joel's ear since his left hand still wasn't steady enough. Duncan told Joel he had cut off contact with Frank until Frank demonstrated genuine change through consistent actions over time. He said apologies were easy, but behavior change was hard. He said he wouldn't watch Frank hurt Joel again. Joel listened and then asked me to hold the phone so he could respond. He told his dad he appreciated the support. He said he might eventually forgive Frank even if their relationship never returned to what it was before. He said holding on to anger took energy he needed for recovery. Duncan was quiet for a moment, then said he understood. He said he would support whatever Joel decided. They talked for a few more minutes about Joel's progress before hanging up. 10 weeks after the accident, Joel got cleared to come home. The doctor said he needed outpatient therapy 3 times weekly and home health aid visits for daily support. I spent 2 days rearranging our house to accommodate his walker. I moved furniture to create wider pathways. I installed grab bars in the bathroom next to the toilet and in the shower. I bought a shower chair so Joel could sit while washing. I moved our bedroom to the first floor since Joel couldn't handle stairs yet. I felt nervous excitement about having him home, but also anxious about managing his care needs. What if something went wrong? What if I couldn't handle it? Mariana came over the day before Joel came home and helped me finish setting everything up. She told me I was going to do fine. She said I had already handled the hardest part. I wanted to believe her. Joel's homecoming was emotional and exhausting. The hospital transport brought him home in a wheelchair even though he could walk short distances with the walker. Maddie stood on the front porch waiting. When Joel came up the ramp I had installed, Maddie started crying. He wanted to hug his dad but was afraid to hug too hard. Joel pulled him close carefully and they both cried. We got Joel inside and settled in the first floor bedroom. He needed to rest after just the trip home. That first day he slept most of the time. When he was awake, he needed frequent breaks between short activities. Walking to the bathroom exhausted him. Eating lunch tired him out. Everything took so much effort. That first night we lay in bed together for the first time in 3 months. Joel was on his back because lying on his side hurt his ribs that were still healing. I lay next to him, careful not to bump his injured arm. The room was dark and quiet. Joel reached over with his good hand and found mine. He whispered thank you for protecting our family when he couldn't. His voice cracked on the last word. I squeezed his hand and told him we protected each other. I told him I couldn't have done any of it without knowing he was fighting to come back to us. We lay there holding hands in the dark, and I realized we had both been carrying impossible burdens that we could finally start sharing again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Joel's walker scraping across the hardwood floor. He was trying to get to the bathroom by himself. I jumped out of bed and caught up to him in the hallway. He looked frustrated when I asked if he needed help. He said he wanted to do it alone. I understood that feeling, but I also knew he wasn't steady enough yet. We compromised. I walked behind him without touching unless he started to lose balance. It took him almost 5 minutes to cover the 15 feet to the bathroom door. When he finally made it, he was breathing hard and sweating. I helped him sit down on the toilet and waited outside the door. These small tasks that used to take seconds now exhausted him completely. After he finished, I helped him back to bed. He fell asleep within minutes. I went downstairs and found Maddie already awake eating cereal at the kitchen table. He asked if Dad was okay. I told him Dad was just tired from walking. Maddie nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He had started sleeping with his bedroom door open, so he could hear if something happened during the night. The physical therapy appointments became the structure around which we built our days. Joel had sessions on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings at 9. I would help him get dressed and into the car. The drive to the therapy center took 20 minutes. Joel would work with his therapist for an hour doing exercises to rebuild his strength and balance. I sat in the waiting room and usually caught up on bills or made phone calls to insurance companies. The medical bills kept coming even though most were covered. There were always copays and deductibles and things insurance decided not to cover. After therapy, we would drive home and Joel would need to rest for at least 2 hours. He hated how tired everything made him. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after he came home, Joel tried to walk to the mailbox at the end of our driveway. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I looked out the window and saw him halfway down the driveway with his walker. My heart jumped into my throat. The driveway sloped downward and I was terrified he would lose control of the walker and fall. I ran outside and caught up to him. He told me to leave him alone. He said he needed to do this. I stayed a few steps behind him the whole way. He made it to the mailbox and back without falling. When we got inside, he collapsed into his recliner and cried. He said he used to run 5 miles every Saturday morning, and now he couldn't even walk to get the mail without almost passing out. I sat on the arm of the chair and rubbed his shoulder. I told him 3 weeks ago he couldn't sit up in bed by himself. I told him progress was happening even when it felt too slow. 4 months after the accident, Gregory called to say all the estate paperwork was finalized. The medical expenses had been paid from Joel's accounts. The insurance settlements were processed. Everything was legally secured. I felt relief wash over me that I didn't know I had been holding back. The constant worry about money had been sitting in my chest like a weight. It wasn't completely gone because we still had ongoing therapy costs and medication expenses. But it was manageable now. I could focus on helping Joel recover instead of lying awake at night wondering if we would lose the house. 5 months after the accident, I was folding laundry in the living room while Joel napped upstairs. Maddie was at the school. The house was quiet. I looked around at our life and barely recognized it. The downstairs had become Joel's recovery space with his walker parked by the couch and his medications lined up on the kitchen counter. Maddie's soccer trophies still sat on the shelf, but there were new things too. Therapy schedules taped to the refrigerator, a shower chair in the bathroom, grab bars on the walls. I realized I had strengths I never knew existed. I had fought off Frank's legal attack while my husband was unconscious. I had managed insurance companies and medical bills and therapy appointments. I had kept Maddie together emotionally while dealing with my own fear. I had learned to accept help from Lily and Mariana instead of trying to do everything alone. I had learned to set boundaries with people like Frank who tried to hurt my family. These weren't things I thought I could do before the accident. 6 months after the accident on a Tuesday morning, I watched from the kitchen window as Joel walked Maddie to the school bus stop. Joel was using just his cane now, no walker. He still moved slowly and carefully, but he could do it. Maddie walked beside him carrying his backpack. They stood together at the corner waiting for the bus. Joel put his hand on Maddie's shoulder. When the bus came, Maddie hugged his dad before climbing on. Joel stood there and waved until the bus turned the corner. Then he walked back to the house by himself. I met him at the door. He was smiling. It was the first real smile I had seen in 6 months. We had survived the worst thing I could imagine. We had come through it changed but together. Joel would never be exactly who he was before the truck hit him. Maddie would always carry the memory of almost losing his father. I would always remember Frank's betrayal and the fight to protect my family. But we were moving forward together with hope and gratitude for each other and clear understanding of what really mattered when everything else got stripped away.